right. Hey, everyone. Super excited for this talk with Dr. Metzger. As I understand it, Phil, this is your first time on a Twitter Space, so thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
Glad to be here. Yeah, this is my first time doing Twitter Space.
Yeah, well, we're honored to have you here. So I'll read out. For a lot of people in our community, we all know you already, but I think it would be good to read out your bio first, and then while I'm reading, if anyone has questions throughout the space, we'll be monitoring the comments on the space, so we'll read those out, and we'll open things up at the very end for people to ask questions as well. Feel free to retweet the space and share it. Helps us get more people in the space, more of an audience for Dr. Metzger. And yeah, so Dr. Philip Metzger is the director, Stephen W. Hawking Center for Microgravity Research and Education at the University of Central Florida, and a planetary physicist with the Planetary Science faculty, developing what he calls economic planetary science to help humanity's expansion beyond Earth. He has 30 years experience at NASA, first as an engineer and then as a physicist, developing and operating spaceflight technologies. He co-founded the NASA KSC Swamp Works, a research and development lab modeled after the Skunkworks, and implementing innovation practices borrowed from Silicon Valley. The Swamp Works focuses on technologies for planetary surfaces, including mining, manufacturing, and construction using space resources. So I guess first off, I do want to define that term that you threw in there, economic planetary science. What does that mean for you?
Okay, so in regular terrestrial geology, it's pretty commonly known that you could be an academic geologist or you could be an economic geologist. And turns out that really about 95% of all geologists are employed or funded by economic geology. That would include mining or managing mines. So if it's about 5% of all geologists work in academia, the other 95% are between research organizations, which are funded mostly for commercial interests, or the majority work directly for mining or drilling companies, and then about 10% work for the government, who are actually managing the mines. So geology is largely driven by economic interests. Most of the data we have about planet Earth, the vast majority of the data actually comes from economic activity rather than from government funding of pure academic interests. And so economic geology has actually driven our understanding of planet Earth. It's given us far more access to the deeper crust of the Earth than we would have ever obtained any other way. So as we're going out into the solar system, so far it's been an entirely academic interest, trying to understand the science of how the planets form and is there life elsewhere in the cosmos. But it's been funded pretty much exclusive by the National Science Foundation and NASA here in the United States. But we're going to start seeing more economic activity off planet Earth, and that's going to include using the resources of space. That means we need to have planetary scientists, geologists who work with other bodies than Earth to help us understand what resources are there, how to access them, and how to utilize them. In order to do a good job of that, we do need to study the formation processes because that informs where do we look. And so we should expect the golden age of planetary science to be beginning right now because of the economic interests driving it. So that's what I mean by economic planetary science.
Totally. So I guess I do want to dive into what you see as the strongest early economic use cases, specifically for the moon. I know that you've spoken before about refueling centers for deep space missions. I'm curious, what does the early Moon Village look like for you, and what do you think are going to be those thriving businesses?
Okay, well, the economic use cases, that's literally the trillion-dollar question. Um, Most people that I know that are working on these issues are in agreement that in the early phases, we rely a lot on the government to be the anchor customer. We're supporting NASA, we're developing technologies NASA needs. And then most people I know that have looked at what's going to happen in the long term will agree that in the long term, there's no problem with the economics of space. We'll have an adequately developed supply chain in space. We'll have adequate activity. And with all of the economies of scale and the synergy of multiple activities, it becomes a no-brainer that almost anything you want to do in space will be profitable. The problem is the midterm. Most of the people I know that are working on business analysis of how to get through that midterm, I think would agree on that. There is a period where we have to get more activity in space. We have to find the customers, develop ways of serving those customers, and get through that period. But I'm very optimistic about it. I've literally worked on this question for 25 years. I've spoken with many of the CEOs of the different space companies, and I understand what a lot of companies' strategies are. And I've worked out business models myself, and I see that the business case does close. So, so that's why I'm optimistic. So that's the general big picture view. The specific answer to your question, I think that the near-term business case will be, first of all, supporting the space agencies to do exploration, supporting other government agencies, which will be interested in positioning their nations to take part in this revolution that is coming. And so there will be government support, government funding. But then when you start to get purely commercial activity in space, it'll be a combination. There will be some space tourism. I used to dismiss space tourism. I didn't think it would scale very well, but I've recently started to think maybe I was too critical of that. There is some scalability of space tourism, and it could be an important source of revenue for some of these companies to get through the midterm. But then I think mining to make rocket propellant from space materials is going to be an early successful business opportunity. There's two ways to do that. One is to make the propellant, including the fuel and the oxidizer. That would require mining water on the moon or extracting water from carbonaceous asteroids. The other way is to forget about the fuel and just go for the oxygen. For a hydrogen oxygen spacecraft, the oxidizer is about 80% of the mass. So if you can get 80% in space, that's within the same order of magnitude. It doesn't change the economics too much. So those are the two main ways. Go for just the oxygen. You can do that anywhere on the moon. You can do that at the equator of the moon, for example. Scoop up the rocks, do chemical reduction reactions to get oxygen out of the minerals, and liquefy it and use it as rocket propellant. Or you can go to the poles of the moon where it's very cold in those dark craters. You can extract the ice and then do electrolysis to make hydrogen and oxygen, and then you'll have both. If you want to use methane to support the Starship architecture, for example, you'll either need to bring the methane from Earth, or in a more exotic scenario, you could bring just the carbon and you could make the methane in space. I don't think that will be viable for some time. The extra infrastructure that would be required to do that chemistry and the handling, I don't think will pay back for quite some time, but there are companies that are interested in that. You could also get carbon out of the lunar ice, but I don't think that's a good use of the carbon. It's rather limited. The ice doesn't have too much carbon in it. But anyways, rocket propellant, the economics do make sense. I think that will become profitable and will start operating within the next 10 years. Beyond the water, there's making metal. You can make metal that can support activity on the lunar surface, either supporting NASA or supporting other economic activities. You could also fling the metal off the surface of the moon and use it to build large structures in space. That'll be a little bit farther in the future before we're doing that. But in the longer term, that becomes viable as well. I used to keep a list of how do you make money in space, and I used to have only 8 things on the list. And I used to think this is it. These are the only 8 categories. But over the years, people would say, well, you forgot this and you forgot that. And people would insist that I had all these really crazy ideas. Like I had one friend who insisted that the moon is going to be great for retirement for elderly people because low gravity is much easier on your bones. And I used to think, yeah, but I don't know how you would have that conversation with your mom, you know, like, Mom, I'm sorry, we're putting you in a nursing home on the moon. So I didn't think that was very credible, but I went ahead and added it to the list, and I think there's about 38 items on the list now, different ideas about how to make money in space.
That's awesome. Yeah, the retirement on the moon. I mean, I'd be down. I'd like to retire on the moon. That sounds amazing. So I'm curious, so when we're talking about, extracting resources, what does a yield look like for that? So would you need like a massively scaled up operation? Like, are we talking like first you'd need to, have some sort of, using the regolith to create some of the manufacturing infrastructure required to mine for those resources, or could we send up all of the manufacturing tools from Earth directly? Do we need some sort of von Neumann replicating, probe that takes in lunar regolith and then creates, a really big manufacturing base to get the types of yield required, or not?
Well, I just published a paper last year that talks about the economics of rocket fuel made on the moon. In that paper, I assumed that all the capital would be made on the Earth and then it would be transported to the moon. Really, you're not going to be making the capital in space until you get to the longer term. The whole goal of this midterm is to develop a supply chain in space. And once that supply chain starts to become more fully developed and you can launch a smaller fraction of the capital from the Earth, then you start to reach the point that it can scale up, and then it can scale up very quickly. I don't think we're going to reach that point for decades. It could be 40 years at the soonest, might be 70 years from now, but I do think it'll be this century, in the latter half of this century, that we will reach this ignition point. Then you've got enough of a supply chain that it will grow explosively and will revolutionize civilization in just a matter of a few more decades beyond that point. So right now, for the next several decades, 4 to 7 decades, I think, we're going to be operating where we launch most of the capital off the Earth. We'll start to make some of the bulk materials in space first, making concrete for construction. You can make steel for structures fairly easily. But everything else that you need, especially electronics, will be exporting from the Earth. So the economics of this picture takes into account the cost of transporting the capital, and then it takes into account the economy of scale of the capital that you put on the moon, and it takes into account learning curve. So if you look at some mining methods, for example, the tent sublimation method, which has been championed by George Sowers, especially, of the Colorado School of Mines. That method produces so much water per mass of capital that, on paper at least, it would be competitive from the very first time you turn on the system. It would produce about 500 times the mass of product as the mass of capital. And I think in my estimation, in my business modeling, you need that factor to be at least 35 to become competitive, but it'll take a few years to make a profit. However, if that ratio is 500, like George Sowers is predicting, then it would become profitable right from the start. And so this is a fairly large system. You're assuming that you're going to be producing something like 1,000 tons of product every year. I forget the exact number. So you're expecting to have customers that will purchase that product. But the system that you deploy to the moon should be profitable right from the very beginning. You will need a nuclear reactor on the surface of the moon to produce enough energy to operate that system. Because of that, it is pretty expensive to start up. And George has been looking at how would you negotiate that startup period. His thinking is that it would be a government, a public-private partnership. So you've got the government's, the public sector investing in this as an investment for the future, both for geopolitical reasons and for positioning for this revolution that's going to happen economically in space. So it makes sense, you know, if we have enlightened leaders in government, they should be able to eventually grasp this, and you will expect there to be funding to support it. So that's the approach George has been taking. I took a different approach that I think is complementary to George's. So a few years ago, I proposed to NASA to develop a new method of mining water on the moon. And the goal of that whole project was to reduce the scope of reduce the size of the capital that's required on the moon. And to try to get it so small that you can make revenue after a single landing of a medium-sized lunar lander to deliver the equipment. So that way, in your very first landing, you can set up operation and start to make revenue. Now, you won't make a profit. You'll possibly lose some money in that first year of operation, but you'll make revenue that will significantly offset the cost. And this will produce optimism among the investors. And really the whole goal of the project was to find a way to get through a Series B investment round. You may remember Planetary Resources and Deep Space Industries. They were both asteroid mining companies. They both achieved seed funding, and then they both had successful Series A investment rounds, but they both stumbled when it came to their Series B round. My interpretation of that is that they failed to produce enough optimism quickly enough to get through the next investment round. And so the goal of this new mining method that I invented was to solve that problem. How do you create optimism on a sufficiently fast time scale that you can get through Series B and then get through Series C, and then somewhere around there you actually start to become revenue positive and you make a profit. So you want to create optimism as you go so that each round of investors will be bought out by the next round so that each round can make a profit, you know, a good profit like 20%, 26% profit or something after just a few years of investment. You know, it has to be a fairly high rate of return for such a risky venture. So, so the idea was create optimism that will allow each series of investors to have an exit at a high level of profit and get to the point that you're making, that you've got an economy of scale that then becomes revenue profitable. So your revenues are exceeding your expenses with profit. So that approach it starts very small scale. It relies on a beneficiation method to get the ice grains separated out from the soil instead of sublimating, vaporizing the ice and then separating it from the soil and refreezing it, which takes a lot of energy. The method is instead to use a magnetic and pneumatic and size sorting method to sort out the ice grains. It takes very little energy, Therefore, you can do this using rovers that carry the energy on their backs, just fuel cells, regenerable fuel cells. They drive down into the dark crater, they scoop up the ground, they do the size sorting, or the material sorting, and then they haul out just the concentrated ore, the ice with some amount of silica still mixed in, but much higher concentration. They drive it out into the sunlight and then do all the resource processing where you've got adequate sunlight. By doing that, you can avoid all the energy infrastructure costs. You don't need a nuclear reactor. You don't need big mirrors on the rims of the crater. And we showed that you can get it down to just a 2,600 kilogram system that would produce enough ice, enough rocket fuel to boost 4 telecommunications satellites per year. I forget, it could have been 3 or 4, which on paper should make a profit. But in reality, because of challenges that you're going to run into, technical challenges, you probably not make a profit for a few years. And so you need to scale it up, get some economy of scale. But you would, within about 7 years, be able to boost telecommunication satellites at a profit. And then within about 15 years, this system would be able to outcompete rocket fuel launched from the Earth all the way down to low Earth orbit. But you might switch your method along the way. You know, you might start out with the starter system, and then within a few years switch over to a different method that has a higher mass to capital ratio. So anyways, that's my thinking on that. I do believe it's going to be economically profitable, and I do think that companies are going to start executing this within a few years.
All right. How much seed funding do you need? Well, can we invest in this now? Can we do the first Twitter Space investment round? But actually, though, how much would it cost to start that the process for that? You mentioned it's a 26 kilogram payload. I guess it's difficult to estimate how much that would cost now, but in dollar figures, do you have a ballpark for what that would require for, a venture capital firm to say, yes, we'll take that bet? Or
yeah, so it's actually 2,600 kilograms, so 2.6 tons.
Okay, I thought you were mentioning each rover was 26. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, no, I mean it's actually a lot of equipment. You've got to do the scooping and you've got to do the beneficiating. You've got to haul it out into the sunlight. You do have to vaporize it when you get out to sunlight, so that you can do the cleanup. You've got to do some cleanup on the volatiles, because the lunar ice is not just water. It includes a lot of other things, including organic molecules. So you've got to do some water cleanup. Then you have to do electrolysis, and you've got to have a liquefaction and storage system. And then you've got to have a spacecraft which can lift off the moon with that water and drop down to GTO, provide a boost to a spacecraft, and then return to the moon. We looked at a lot of different architectures, and so you could have a spacecraft that stays in low lunar orbit, so you're turning it into a multi-stage system, which has definite benefits. And so there is quite a bit of capital, but it's not that much, not compared to some of the other mining methods. Now, the cost, unfortunately, I forgot the number. We use standard cost estimating methods. If you go to the Global Security website, for example, they have a cost estimator for aerospace hardware. And we use that. I think we came out to, I think it was $65 a kilogram or something, but it was in the millions of dollars. Probably, actually, you know what? I see there's a listener that could answer this question. If you want to have Eric Franks from Sysloon, he's actually been working on some of these systems, and he might be able to talk about the cost.
I've invited him up here. Yeah, that'd be great. Well, so you said millions with an M or billions with a B?
Millions with an M.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, so for example, the OSIRIS-REx mission was 2.1 billion with a B, but a small lunar mission might cost only 300 million with an M. And so, and these are for NASA missions that are one-off. You're only building one copy, and they expect very high reliability. They're expecting like 95 to 99% reliability for the lifetime of the mission. We're looking at systems where you can do repairs. You can build the system modularly. So let's say you build your rovers in 5 modules. And if one of those 5 modules breaks, it's designed that you can replace just that one unit robotically by teleoperation. So if you can replace pieces just granularized down to 1/5 of the mass on each asset, that ends up creating a huge mass averaged increase in the reliability of your system. So the cost of reliability is exponential. So instead of using this extreme testing process that NASA uses to get 99% reliability, you could build much lower reliability hardware where you plan to do repairs and replacements. And we're going to rely on the fact that transportation to the moon is decreasing. Transportation costs are decreasing. So the cost of getting spares to the moon is going down. And with these factors, you can accept a base reliability of like 72% and still meet your mission goals. And that produces a huge cost savings relative to what NASA would have paid for the same hardware. So instead of having a lunar lander mission that costs $300 million, you might get it for 10 million, 20 million. I'm just shooting from the hip here because I don't remember the numbers, but that's the kind of thing you're looking at in order to close the business case on some of these things.
Yeah, that's less than I was expecting, which is really exciting. We have Eric up here on stage too. I don't know if you have any other comments on that.
Yeah, I've been working and talking with Phil for a long time and built my company Sysloon around a lot of his concepts and the work that we're doing with NASA. But there's also other exciting companies like Venturi Astrolab and other companies like Lockheed Martin that are competing for the Lunar Terrain Vehicle Services. It's basically the next lunar rover contract, and NASA's funding that, and that's supposed to come out, I believe, in March of this year. But that's along the same lines as something like the SpaceX Starship, where the cost of transportation, even once you get down to the surface of the moon, is coming down pretty dramatically. And their costs are, maybe a third or less of the costs that we've heard from some of the CLIPS providers like Astrobotic or Intuitive Machines, just to get things on the ground. And they also offer moving it around on a rover. So I think the costs are really going to come down quite dramatically for all kinds of operations. And it means that you can get down to the surface, do your prototype testing, prove it out, and then raise that additional round of funding to allow you to really scale up this operation and start refueling SpaceX Starships, start refueling Blue Origin landers, things like that. So it's a really exciting time in the next couple of years as we get back to the moon.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly exciting. I say this often, but I do think we're living in the most exciting period in human history. Yeah, I mean, this is historic that we're going to the moon, but this time actually to stay and build what Phil's calling, the moon village. And I'm curious, within that village, there are also going to be a bunch of other smaller services that need to be provided. I wonder if there are any particular pain points, Phil, that you've noticed in trying to construct this like bigger picture architecture? Are there any unexpected challenges that came up?
Well, one that I've been working on for a long time now is the rocket plume effects. When you land on an airless body like the moon, you don't have an atmosphere to stop the blowing sand and dust. Here on the Earth, like for example, when the Starship had their first test flight, the concrete pad exploded. The ejecta that went the farthest, well, apart from something weird that happened with rain clouds, but which sent sand very far. But apart from that, the ballistic transport of the ejecta only. The particles that went the farthest were the large chunks, like big boulders of concrete. And then the things like dust don't go anywhere at all. It just makes a cloud right around the launch pad. It doesn't go anywhere. That's because the drag force of the atmosphere stops the particles that have a small ballistic coefficient, the smaller particles. But on the moon, when there's no atmosphere, the particles that have the smallest ballistic coefficient are the ones that get sped up to the highest velocity by the rocket exhaust. And then they fly out into vacuum, and there's nothing to slow it down. So these particles could be going 3,000 meters per second, 3 kilometers per second. That's like 6 times the speed of a bullet. If you have a hydrogen-oxygen engine, they could be traveling 4.5 kilometers per second. So another 150, that's 150%. So we're talking about 9 times the speed of a bullet. These particles, when they impact hardware, they're so tiny, they're not going to break off chunks of the hardware, but it can scour the surface and ruin the surface coatings, ruin the glass, ruin the coatings that are supposed to provide good emissivity for cooling purposes. It could ruin photovoltaics. And then also you get larger particles that can cause bulk damage as well, break things. So we didn't really understand how bad of a problem this was. During Apollo, they wanted to test if they could land close to another spacecraft. So on Apollo 12, they landed 160 meters away from the deactivated Surveyor 3 spacecraft, which had been sitting on the moon for 2.5 years. They decided to land about 150 yards away because they thought that was far enough away to prevent any sandblasting damage. Well, what we learned, so Apollo 12 did land near it. They cut pieces off and brought them back to Earth. I had those pieces in my lab for several years where we did the first modern analysis of those parts using new capabilities that have been developed since the Apollo program. So we used scanning electron microscopy, and we used photo ionization spectroscopy and other methods, laser scanners, to really understand what happened to this hardware that got sandblasted. What we were able to prove was that the hardware actually only received 0.1% of the damage that it would have received if it had not been down inside a crater below most of the spray. So if it had been up on a surface level to the Apollo, it would have been 1,000 times worse damage. And the damage that it sustained was already unacceptable. You wouldn't want to have that much damage happen to a piece of hardware that you're going to actually use. So when you do the math, it turns out that without any other mitigation, if you just want to try to land farther away to provide adequate mitigation, you would have to land, let's say you've got a bigger lander too. Instead of the Apollo lunar module, which was 7 tons, let's say you're landing a 40-ton vehicle. You would have to land 26 kilometers away from the hardware to get it down to an acceptable level of damage. And 26 kilometers is too far. You can't just land and hop in a rover and drive 26 kilometers like it's routine operations. So we're going to have to do something to mitigate the sandblasting damage. I think, one of the approaches is what SpaceX is doing on the Starship. They've put their thrusters up high, and I can't talk any details about Starship because I'm not allowed to. I have done a little bit of work for them, but I can say in terms of general principles, that is a very good method to reduce the sandblasting damage. Putting thrusters up high definitely will reduce the amount of material that has been sprayed. I worked on that concept with the United Launch Alliance back in the around 2010, 2014, in that period, on the Zeus lander concept. So that was where I first analyzed how does placing the thrusters improve the situation. But another approach is build landing pads. so that the lander is not going to blow any dust, because there's the landing pad is a competent surface, and it has an adequate radius so that by the time the gas blows out over the edge of the landing pad, it has expanded into vacuum enough to become low density so that it's not able to pick up the dust off the surface. So that's another approach to mitigating it. But building landing pads is going to take equipment. It will take investment to prove that your method of building a competent material out of lunar soil is adequate. You have to prove it can withstand the high temperatures and the pressures, the impact loading of the foot pads touching down. It has to withstand the thermal cycling from the sun rising and setting every 14 and a half days over that location, so that it doesn't crack up. And so it does have to withstand pretty severe environmental conditions. And it's going to take some research, and it's going to take some trial and error to perfect that. So, and we really need to have international agreements on how countries are going to manage their plume blast effects, so that we don't have countries damaging other countries' hardware, possibly violating the Outer Space Treaty. And on the other hand, we don't want countries setting blast radii around their hardware as an excuse to create national territory on the moon. Like if you wanted to land a sensitive scientific instrument in the center of Shackleton Crater and then claim that you need 20-kilometer blast zone, you've just essentially claimed all the resources of Shackleton Crater for yourself. So I don't think we really appreciated that. We're still figuring out how bad of a problem it is year by year as we work on it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, as you're talking about that, I wonder, what does that mean for where we store that equipment and habitats, etc., especially human habitats. In your analyses, are you considering humans also working there at those sites and supporting the sites, or when you're doing the math and the big picture business plan, is this purely robotic missions? And I guess if there are humans there, what do those habitats look like? Are they in the lunar lava tubes? How do you support that?
Yeah, I think that we want to have humans in space. I think that in the long run, the economics of space are going to become much more favorable, and by doing a lot of robotic industry in space, it's going to make it very affordable to put humans in space. And so we'll never stop having humans in space. I think civilization is going to move beyond planet Earth, and it'll just become ordinary for people to live off the planet, for people to travel back and forth into space and back to Earth again. I do think the economics of settling Mars are favorable. I think that the technical challenges are often exaggerated. They're all simple to solve technically. It's really just an economic problem, but as this economic revolution occurs in space, that's going to be overwhelmingly solved as well. So I think it's really inevitable. There's going to be people living on Mars, big cities on Mars. Could happen sooner or later, but I think it's inevitable. So I think humans in space is going to be a part of the picture forever. What about in the near term? Do we want to put humans in space to do this mining? Well, because this economic revolution is going to be so revolutionary, it's arguably the most highly leveraged activity humans will ever do, ever. Developing a supply chain off the planet will create so much value that you cannot overestimate the benefits of investing in that today. Any investment you put into it is going to pay back so greatly that it will be worth it. And humans are so capable at developing technology, developing robotics, troubleshooting, that the extra cost of putting humans in space to work with the robotics today is overwhelmingly worth it. Now, that doesn't mean that every company that's struggling to get their Series A investment is going to raise enough money to be able to put humans in space. So individual companies mostly cannot plan on humans being there unless they're collaborating with NASA. So I think in the near term, there's a very important role for government to put humans in space, put humans on the moon, to have humans involved in developing these robotic technologies that operate on the moon. It's going to pay back tremendously for humanity. It's going to pay back tremendously for the countries that are able to and wise enough to invest in this. And so I think it should be, and I think it will be, both humans and robots in the near term, through the midterm, and then in the long term. So I think it will always be robots plus humans, never just one or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if we had more kids dreaming that their dream job might be a robotics technician on the moon versus a TikTok influencer, the world would be a better place. So I think we'll open this up to other people that have questions, and we're also looking here at the comment section as well. I guess we've got one person here requesting already. Rocco, if you'd like to ask a question to Dr. Metzger, go ahead. Great, you're on with us here, Rocco. Can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
There we go. Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, you called me a slightly bad time, but I did have a quick question about the intersection of the singularity with space colonization of the solar system. In particular, if we're worrying about, sandblasting of landers and stuff like that, if we have an AI-based singularity on Earth in the next 15 years, we're probably worrying about the wrong thing. I've been thinking about how quickly could a self-replicating, pure robotic and AI-based civilization convert all of the matter and energy in the solar system into computation. In particular, how quickly could you construct a Dyson sphere? I was chatting to Anders Sandberg about that. So I don't know if you guys have any opinions on that, but the kind of estimates that we were coming to is that you could construct a Dyson sphere within about 3 months to maybe 18 months using sort of von Neumann type self-replicating systems once you've built those systems, which is a fairly short time compared to the kind of timescales you're talking about. So I'd be interested to hear how realistic you guys think that is, whether you have any sort of comments on that line of thinking that, we're sort of solving the wrong problem if we're thinking about sandblasting. We should really be thinking about, AI and robotics leading a sort of extremely rapid process to move humanity to a Kardashev 2 level civilization.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I agree with you that when you do the math and do the modeling on the scale up of self-replicating systems, it blows our common sense out of the water. I published a paper on this, in fact, way back around 2012, where we looked at bootstrapping industry off planet Earth. We tried, we were basing that study on the 1980 summer study that NASA did. So this was an update to what they did in 1980. And we said, instead of launching a factory to the moon, let's build it incrementally, where we build the parts of the factory as we go. So you constantly upgrade your equipment as you go. And it turned out you could build a self-replicating system with just launching about 12 tons of hardware to the moon if you use that kind of approach. But so it dramatically brings down the cost, but more importantly, it gives you the experience of maturing the technology in the environment where it's supposed to operate. I think that's the real issue. The issue isn't launch cost of the capital. It's just developing the technology, which takes some experience in the environment. But if we started that today, then within a few decades, we could have a self-replicating system. And really only a few decades is all it would take, like 20 years. I think realistically, considering politics, we could get it done in 40 years very easily. That's why I say 40 to 70 years before this revolution occurs. It's based on how long it would take to get a fully autonomous supply chain, fully self-sufficient supply chain in space. But the modeling went further. We then said, what will happen after you develop this replicating system? And by the way, it doesn't need to be a self-replicating von Neumann machine. It could just be a bunch of different companies with different factories building different things. You know, the ecosphere is interrelated. Like a raccoon, we think of a raccoon as a self-replicator, but the raccoon depends on the ecosphere. You know, it depends on more than just raccoons to replicate. So if you establish this ecosystem of activity on the moon, which can then be a closed supply chain and scale up exponentially fast, how long will it be until it revolutionizes civilization? Well, we looked at what the replication rate would be, and the replication rate, it could double in every 1 or 2 years, and that's taking.
Hang on, what's that 1 or 2 years based on? Because what we were looking at, you know, just looking at the pure sort of physical limitations and the empirical relationship between the mass of a self-replicating entity and its doubling time. I mean, it could be significantly faster than that. It could be, you know, days, 3 days to double.
Yeah, I don't doubt that. We were being very conservative, and we said at the beginning of our paper that we are not including technologies that we don't know enough about yet. So
I see. Yeah.
We decided not to include the possible effects of nanotechnology. We didn't even include full autonomy in this analysis. We said that you could have teleoperators. But as time goes on, you increase the number of machines per the number of teleoperators. But so very conservative study. It turned out the pinch point was the 3D printing and or casting processes where you're converting mass into parts. The other aspects, the energy, the mining, the transportation, those were not pinch points. And we were very conservative. We said, well, let's just look at 3D printing, even though it's not very fast compared to other manufacturing methods. And we looked at what expectations for 3D printing would be within about 10 years. And using that number, you can get a doubling time of every 1 or 2 years. So it's very conservative. But even with a 1 or 2 year doubling time, after just 20 years, that system can produce as much economic value as the Earth 1 million times over. 1 million times the productivity of planet Earth after just 20 years. After you've achieved a full self-replicating supply chain, you've already increased the size of this about 100,000 during that process. And then 20 more years after that, you've got 1 million times the output of planet Earth. And so it doesn't take long to become a type 2 civilization and then go on to other stars. So yeah, the scaling is really revolutionary. I try not to speculate too much in that direction because I'm working on midterm problems. How do we develop business cases to get through this period that we're creating a complete supply chain? And yes, I will agree that we may be working on the wrong problem because AI is going to revolutionize things. There will be other breakthrough technologies like nanotech. But the goal of my work is to convince the government to invest in it now because by positioning yourself and having some work going on in space, as these revolutions happen, then you are in a position to leverage them. So I'm really trying to advocate for rapid investment to begin the midterm processes, and then the revolutions are going to happen in ways we can't predict.
I mean, like, get MoonDAO to issue a token for the construction of a Dyson sphere. I would buy that.
Yeah. So there are a lot of other issues. Like, we don't want a Dyson sphere around our star, probably, because that's going to block the view of the heavens. And maybe we would rather have us, invent better propulsion systems, and be able to build a Dyson sphere around the next star over. So I don't know. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about these issues. There's also the problem of how do we manage AI when it becomes that advanced? Is AI going to have a mind of its own, and is it going to decide it doesn't want to serve the humans anymore? There are a lot of issues here. One of the more far-reaching issues that I do like to think about is how can we democratize space so that we can keep a small group of humans from abusing all that power that you will get once you have that much manufacturing capability.
Well, I think crypto is a great way to do that. Probably the only way, actually.
So
yeah, I mean, this is something we think about a lot with MoonDAO is how do we, get the sort of guide of a lot of this technology in the hands of as many people as possible, such that we do mitigate maybe some of those potential risks long term. I do want to send it over to Andrew, who is a member of our community as well, to ask a question as well. Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to bring the question back to a little more, back down to earth a little bit and a little more near term. Dr. Phil, you originally had said you didn't support the concept of space tourism. I'm just curious what caused you to believe that originally, and what's changed to change your mind?
Well, I used to be more pessimistic about it because I didn't think it scaled very high. There just aren't that many people that can afford to go on a jaunt around the moon. There will be even fewer people that can afford to go live in a hotel on the moon for a week or two. So I didn't think it had the scaling power to produce the kind of revenue that we would need to build a full supply chain in space. It could be some revenue for some companies. I just didn't think it would scale very well. However, I have read a few papers that argued that the scaling is better than that because the costs will go down. As the costs go down, then the number of people that can afford to participate will increase. And as that happens, then your economy of scale gets even better and the costs go down further. And so you have this virtuous cycle. So there have been a few papers published, and I think they were convincing. I haven't focused on it too much, so I couldn't speak quantitatively on how well we can expect space tourism to participate in these revolutions, in the economic revolution of space. But I'm just not as I used to be.
Okay.
Andrew, I think we lost your connection there. We couldn't hear the question.
Oh, I'm just saying thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yep, there we go.
Okay.
Great. You're still breaking up for us a little bit here. Okay, we've got Peter Haig up on stage as well. Go ahead, Peter.
Hello.
Hi, Peter.
Hi, Phil. I just got first a comment on the stuff about the exponential growth. I've been tracking the growth of Falcon 9 master orbit, and that's tracking at about 43% per year, which is roughly doubling every 2 years. So, because you get things like Moore's law, these things tend to become self-fulfilling prophecies because they turn into targets for competitors. I just thought I'd add that as a sort of a realistic near-term doubling rate. Although what you tend to find with exponentials is that they're just the fastest way to run into a hard limit. So I'm not sure about projecting these right forward to Dyson spheres. I'm not sure if that's reasonable. But as for the question, there's from the perspective of making lunar propellant, there's been sort of some noises, notably from the US Space Force, about having sort of what we call like a strategic reserve, and sort of essentially just stating we will pay X dollars per kilogram if you put some propellant to this location, just so we can store it. I'm wondering if you're aware of any that or any similar schemes that might be useful to bootstrap this process.
Yeah, so I'm familiar with the concept, but I missed the very last part of your question. Am I aware of any what kind of scheme?
You were aware of this? I mean, you were aware of this, but are you aware of any other kind of schemes where you can get some sort of government money to sort of bootstrap this?
Yeah, so I think that the defense community has been paying attention to the growth of industry in space, and they are concerned that we need to be ahead of it. We need to have plans, and so we're beginning to see more investment in this. Recently, DARPA, which in the United States is a government agency that invests in the development of advanced technologies that could have defense applications somewhere in the future. And DARPA has recently solicited proposals on starting industry on the moon's surface. And in particular, they're interested in developing an ecosystem of businesses on the moon, where these businesses are using shared infrastructure. So DARPA wants to know, what is the infrastructure that we need on the moon, so in order to help this ecosystem of business activities get started. So we are seeing the defense establishment paying attention to this potential revolution, this I think inevitable revolution that's coming in the economics of space. But how do we get more investment in the right now? That's a tough problem. The issue is we've got to convince Parliament, or we've got to convince Congress here in the U.S. And a lot of the members of Parliament or members of Congress are worried about their election, which is in 2 years, and they want to resonate with the voters. But talking about revolutionary economics in space is so far removed from voters' everyday lives that these members of Congress aren't going to be that excited about it. So for a while there, I was feeling very pessimistic that we're not getting the attention of Congress. And so I started thinking we need to have a social movement where we have voters demanding that we develop space. And so I actually gave a talk on this once. How do we create a social revolution to demand development in space? But I don't think that's going anywhere either. I don't think we're going to get enough attention from the voters to turn this into a big social revolution that changes the political environment. I think more likely we're going to see incremental investment from companies that are developing business models, and we're going to see the defense industry continue to grow their interest in protecting these business activities. And so I think we are turning the corner. We're starting to see more investment. So I'm pretty optimistic that the investment is coming. I don't know of any specific strategies right now to make it happen faster, other than continue to communicate, continue to develop the technologies, continue to talk with investors and get companies working on these things, and create a proof of what's possible on a small scale, so that then the policymakers will see what's happening, and we should get some acceleration of investment.
Yeah, but I mean, over here in the UK, I'm trying to sort of work on an approach to sort of push the UK government to think about this sort of thing. I'm hoping to sort of get them to sort of experience some FOMO if they start to see lots of American companies doing this. I'm not sure if that will work out, but
one approach you could try is focusing on creation of jobs. So I know that there's a rust belt in the UK, just like there is in the United States, where industries have been replaced by overseas industries, and there are a lot of workers who are underemployed. And so if you can create programs that will help create jobs, help create businesses, entrepreneurship focused on technology, then maybe that could get more attention with the politicians. So, for example, developing robotics competitions that are educational, but also teach entrepreneurship, and will start to get fledgling businesses started and get people employed. It may be possible to get politicians interested in that so that they can start investing in these things, which can then be related to robotics in space. That's just an idea. I have had a lot of interest in educational programs as a way to support development of technology, and it might work.
Yeah, this is something that we think about all the time at MoonDAO, and yeah, especially like the core of the issue is that the will is there. There are millions of people around the world that want to see a lunar base in their lifetimes. They'd like to participate and help in one way or another. The question is how do you, I guess, access all that sort of like latent energy and will and organize it in some productive way. Phil, I wanted to ask you, something that we've been tinkering on a lot is setting up competitions. So basically, we'd have people from all over the world that want to see X happen, and then it would launch something kind of like an X Prize for the moon. And I know that this isn't a new idea. Google even had a sort of an X Prize for the moon years back. But I'm curious, if we were to launch one of these prizes, what do you think would have the most impact here? What do you think would be the best thing to target in order to maybe mobilize some of the mind share of people from all over the world that want to participate in the creation of a lunar base?
Yeah, that's a big question, and I haven't spent enough time thinking about the question framed in that way. So all I can do is talk around the edges of it. I have been a judge for about 10 or 12 years for the NASA robotic mining competition. It's also been called Lunabotics for most of its time. I was one of the judges, and I got the idea that we should be taking notes on the robots and learning from the robots. So about the third year of the competition, I created a form and I got it filled out for every robot, where we took down the gear ratios, the motor torques, the aspect ratio of the wheelbase, the wheel diameter. We collected all the statistics on every robot, and we also graded the robots on how well they were able to drive and mine and other activities in the lunar regolith. So we've now evaluated about 450 robots, and we have this gigantic database. Using that database, I've analyzed why some robots are able to drive without getting stuck, whereas other ones will get stuck in the soil almost immediately. And from that, we were able to create an equation that predicts the ability of a robot to drive in the lunar soil. It's an empirical equation based on analyzing hundreds of robots, which we could have never done, except that it was a competition where we were crowdsourcing robot designs. And this robot, I call it the robot equation, it's able to predict really accurately how well a robot can avoid getting stuck in lunar soil. So I think there's technological value in this. So this is an example of how we could use a competition in order to actually advance the technology. So I think there are ways to create competitions that will advance the tech and create ownership in that advanced technology among the participants. So it's a way to get sweat equity in lunar industry. I'm now the director of the Stephen Hawking Center at the University of Central Florida. And this is one of the things I'm working on, a concept. We haven't committed to this yet, but I'm very interested in developing a competition where we can get people helping develop these technologies and find a way to create equity for democratizing space. By the way, I'll just mention, since I brought up the name Stephen Hawking, Stephen flew in reduced gravity back around 2011. I think he flew twice, 2 different flight campaigns. And during that period, he was making public statements about how space is our future. And we've got to get the public excited in space, because if we don't, then we don't have a future. Well, I think he was right. And so at that time, the University of Central Florida worked with Stephen Hawking, and he commissioned the Stephen W. Hawking Center for Microgravity Research and Education at the University of Central Florida. After he passed away, we've continued to work with his estate, and the Board of Governors at the university has made it an official center of the university now. So we are very interested in continuing Stephen's vision. We want to find ways to get the public excited about space and get the public invested in space so that we have a future. And so one of the concepts I've been looking at is this: how do we use competitions to democratize space? And so I think there is something there that we can do, and I think it can and probably will make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'd love to figure out how MoonDAO can support that. I think these tools are especially powerful for basically getting capital in, and then also formalizing rules on chain so that people can compete and know the rules of the game before they jump in. But yeah, it's definitely something. I agree with you. You know, if we don't figure out a way to get the enthusiasm up about space and make it one of our priorities, that we're sort of stuck in maybe this low growth mindset where we're maybe more focused on the scarcity of Earth's resources rather than the abundance of resources out in space.
That's exactly right. And when you look at these wars that are happening in the world right now, like in Ukraine, what a total waste of potential for if one country thinks, I'm going to go grab resources from another country and we're going to make our country richer by doing that. What they're really doing is they're impoverishing themselves, because you can create wealth faster through technology than the amount of wealth you can grab from raw resources here on the planet. Technology has been growing exponentially by lots of measures for hundreds of years now. And exponential growth means not only the amount of tech, but the rate of growth and the acceleration are all growing exponentially. And so the rate of technological growth is currently so fast that if you are not participating in developing tech, then you are impoverishing yourself as a country or as a people group. So trying to grab resources here on the Earth is a road to poverty. The only way to join in an abundant future is to stop trying to grab other people's stuff and collaborate with people. Putting more brains together makes you work faster. And so collaborative development of technology is the only road that makes sense at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the phrase that we like to use is collaborative competition. So And that's what capitalism is, I guess. At the end of the day, it's you're kind of working together in a sports league. You set rules for the bounds of the game, and then you compete. And so there's still meritocracy, and the winners get more, but there's a collaboration element there, and the fruits of that labor is shared between everyone. I'm reading one of the questions in the comments here. A really good one from John Berrigan. He's asking the growth of power. So the growth of the village will be limited by the availability of power, and I think this is a curious question because it's a problem here on Earth as well as on the Moon. His question is thoughts on how power infrastructure can keep up with needs as the village grows. What are your thoughts there?
Okay, so the Moon is rather unique because it rotates so slowly in the sunlight. You have these long night times, 14 and a half days of darkness, then 14 and a half days of sunlight. That's if you're at the equator of the Moon. If you're at the poles of the Moon, you can find locations where the nighttime is as short as 9 Earth days. But you still have these very long nights. So the challenge with solar energy on the Moon is you've got to store a lot of energy to get through the lunar nights. Ignoring that for the moment, let's just talk about solar energy in terms of total energy that you can collect. When I looked at this self-replicating or self-expanding supply chain on the Moon in that 2012 paper, we assumed that it would be entirely solar energy. And we assumed that it would shut down during the lunar nights and restart again when the sun comes up. We did that to be very conservative. We were assuming no humans or humans would be visiting periodically to repair things, but it would be a largely robotic industry. So with those ground rules, we were including the industry to create solar cells out of the lunar soil. And there has been some work on that. There's even a company that specializes in that. There's probably more than one company now. I think there's one in Texas. There's also one called Mana Electric, which is in Europe. And these companies are developing the technology to take lunar soil and 3D print solar cells. So we used the best of available data from those processes. And for conservatism, I said, let's just put 30 times more of your industry's metabolism into printing solar cells at each step, at each iteration of the industry. We're gonna put a safety factor of 30, which is really comfortable safety margin. It's way more than you would normally do. But I just wanted to prove the point that even if you over invest your metabolism in building solar cells, you're still going to have a positive metabolism. You're still going to be able to build everything in each generation with the amount of energy you've currently got. And with this metabolism of factor of 30 extra investment in solar cells, you could still replicate, you can still double your industry every 2 years, 1 to 2 years. So solar cells was not the pinch point in building up lunar industry. So I don't believe there's really a problem in building enough solar power on the Moon. There is a challenge, which I haven't looked into enough, for getting through the lunar night. What systems are you going to use to store the energy? You could just use nuclear and just not do solar. You could put space-based solar and beam the energy down to the poles of the Moon from space. That's possible. You could use storage. One of the systems that I worked on, which the contractor that I worked with chose to patent this invention that I had, was to use lunar dust as the heat storage medium, because the amount of energy you can store in rock is equal per kilogram to the amount of energy you can store in a battery. And so we developed a system to just heat the dust and then get the heat back out to run a Stirling cycle to create electricity. And on paper, it works. I built the system right when I retired from NASA and came to the university. So I never got to turn the system on to test it. But the company went ahead and patented it. And I believe it will work. I believe you can simply have big silos full of dirt. You heat the dirt, heat the dust, running it through a heat exchanger, pile it up in a big grain silo, and then at the end of the lunar day, you start to suck the dirt back out using pneumatics, or blow it back out using pneumatics, run it through heat exchangers again, and create electricity. So there's things like that you can do that can be scalable, where most of the mass is on the moon, rather than having to bring it from the Earth. But I haven't looked at this comprehensively. I don't know the overall landscape of energy storage methods that you could use on the moon.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I feel like there's usually sort of this in people's minds, maybe like two paths forward, one more nuclear, one more solar. But yeah, the energy efficiency of solar cells on the moon is, I think, that's pretty. That makes a huge difference versus here on Earth. Yeah.
Yeah. Even on a perfectly clear day, if you're on the Earth, there's actually tiny bits of ice way up high in the sky, or there is a lot of the time, and that defocuses the direct collimated sunlight coming. When you see the yellow disk in the sky, that collimated yellow sunlight or whitish sunlight gets scattered by the ice. And so that does have a very measurable decrease in the power that you can get when you're trying to concentrate that energy on the surface. But when you're on the moon, you avoid that completely. So you do have higher efficiency in solar energy on the moon compared to the Earth.
Definitely. Yeah. I didn't know that about the ice crystals. That's very interesting. We have a couple more questions here in the comments. Some of them we've already covered already. I'm trying to find one that we haven't hit yet. Someone's asking here about if they were to start a company now for the lunar economy, what is sort of like the best business case? What are the what might be an underrated concept for a startup that people haven't, or that you haven't seen yet, that you think someone should get into?
Okay, so first of all, there are a lot of ideas out there, and companies that are working ideas are not going to talk about it necessarily. They're going to keep it as intellectual property until they're ready to go public. Also, I make a living by innovating, and I get a lot of government grants, and my business operation is I innovate, then I talk to a company and I say, I'll give you my idea if I can get 30% of the money. Because a lot of these grants are only allowable for companies. They're not all open for universities. So I come up with ideas, I work with companies, I share the idea with a company, and then I get kind of the money that way. So I really can't give away my ideas for free. That's how I make a living. I'm not going to tell you my ideas right now, but I'll just say in general, you want to find something that has consumers here on the Earth. You could do something that serves the government, serve the Space Force or the Air Force or NASA, or in another country, your own space agency. So you could develop some concept that will provide a service to that government agency. But if you're not doing that, you need to find something that consumers here on the Earth are willing to pay money to get. It is challenging. This is why getting through the midterm of lunar and space industry development is challenging. The transportation cost to and from space is very high. And if you don't have good access to your capital, then it's difficult to maintain it. It's difficult to upgrade it and repair it. And so that makes it very difficult to come up with business ideas. But a lot of companies are working on a wide variety of ideas. Like there's one company that has made a public announcement that they're going to put a computer server on the moon. I think their first server is going to the moon this year on one of these CLIPS landers. And they plan to scale up their servers on the moon. Now, I don't understand who your customers are. Why do customers want to have computer servers on the moon? I don't know, to be honest. But they say they've got customers. Another idea is, well, I'll just give you some crazy ideas that I don't think are great, but on my list of how do you make money in space, you could bring back materials from space and sell it as knickknacks. You know, you could sell rocks, just sell lunar rocks, or you could make jewelry out of the lunar materials that you bring back. There was a Canadian company we used to work with, and they would jokingly say their business model was making beer out of the lunar ice. And they had a whole list of different beer brands that they were going to create. They were going to create Lunar Lager, Shackleton Stout, South Pole Porter, and so the thing about that is you can bring back an ounce of water and put one molecule of water in each can of beer and claim that it contains lunar water. You know, so it's basically homeopathic lunar water. You've diluted it down to the fact that, I don't know, maybe you don't even have a single molecule in the entire can, but it was diluted down from lunar water, and you can claim it. So, I mean, there's a lot of crazy ideas you can pursue. But I like the idea of rocket fuel. I like the idea of being a part of the ecosystem that creates and provides rocket fuel. That ecosystem includes transport vehicles, space tugs to provide boost services. It includes storage. It could be at depots in orbit or on the lunar surface. It includes power systems, it includes rovers. So there's a whole ecosystem of technologies that need to be developed for providing rocket fuel in space. You know, Elon wants to build a city on Mars, and I have done modeling of that. And I was surprised. The modeling came out actually really optimistic. I think he's going to be successful. I think SpaceX will be successful in building a city on Mars. I don't know how fast they'll get it done, but if you actually do the economics modeling rather than just shoot from the hip, well, the numbers are actually pretty good. The key thing is going big. You know, if you start to go big and build a city with a lot of people, with a lot of ability to do stuff, then the economics are actually really good. And I based this modeling on US economic data. I went to all the government agencies and I got all the data on all the different sectors in terms of labor and energy and massive capital, massive product, economic values. I assume that Mars is only going to be a services economy, so they're only going to make products that they can sell back on planet Earth without having to transport mass back to Earth. There's actually a lot of different things you can do that are services, like engineering analysis and design, biomedical invention, biomedical research. And it turns out you can completely fund a city on Mars doing only services sector. Well, okay, so the reason I took this rabbit trail to discuss building a city on Mars is because I think that SpaceX is going to continue chugging down that road. They are going to continue building the ability to build cities on Mars. And as they chug down that path, there will be opportunities to support. And so you could create a business that provides some support service along the way. You might actually have your company get bought by SpaceX at some point. And so you can get a big exit and a big profit at some point. But the services could be anything. It could be providing creature comforts for people that are in reduced gravity, or providing creature comforts for people living on another planet. I don't think people have thought about that too much yet, but there will be a business for that. I don't know when, maybe 20 years from now. But I think that you can start a business and you can start to target dual use technologies, find ways to monetize your technology in the near term, either by supporting astronauts in the space station, and doing things in cislunar space and eventually grow it into a big business supporting people that are going to be living on Mars. So I don't know. There's a few ideas there. It's really up to you to do the brainstorming. You know, one time I was talking on Twitter about patenting a method of building concrete on the moon. And somebody pointed out that the first patent on this was by Larry Taylor, who's now deceased, but he was a colleague at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And it's true. He was the first person, as far as I know, to patent that technology. But if you do a patent search on concrete or cement, there's literally 1 million or 10 million patents on concrete. And there's gonna be thousands and then millions of patents on everything that you can do in space. You know, so it's not like everything has already been invented. It's not like that ecosphere is already full. No, we're barely getting started. We've barely started to learn how to use these materials off-world and how to work in that environment. And so you got this entire universe of innovation that's wide open. And there's not a lot of people working in that space yet. So it might look like everything has already been taken up, but it really hasn't. You know, it's really an infinite world of possibilities out there that you can join in, but you've got to do the creative brainstorming to come up with ideas to try to figure out how to plug in there.
Yeah, that I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Everything that we do here on Earth will need to be done in some way or other on, you know, the surface of Mars or even on a lunar base. If there are humans involved, they'll need to do all the same human stuff that we do here on Earth too. So yeah, there really is a whole world of possibility. I have another question for you here. So, you know, MoonDAO really has two main, you know, pursuits. One is in research, and the other is in exploration. And so, you know, in doing some research for this, we saw that you've done 450 parabolas in zero, lunar, and Martian gravity. And we're wondering, you know, what do you take from those experiences? Have they informed your perspective on challenges and possibilities of human exploration? Did you have any big insights through those experiences?
Yeah. So first of all, it was amazing to get to experience that. The lunar gravity, phenomenologically, you know, inside your body felt about the same as zero gravity. The only difference is you do come back down to the ground again. So you hop, you're airborne for quite a long time, and eventually you land. Whereas zero gravity, it feels pretty much the same, except you don't come back down. Mars gravity, on the other hand, felt like a big disappointment. It felt a lot like Earth gravity. It's only 3/8 of Earth's gravity, but phenomenologically, you could walk around and it just didn't feel that different from Earth gravity. So, so that's just for what it's worth. I think people who eventually live on Mars, they're not going to notice the low gravity all that much. We do need to have more research to understand if there's anything that it does to your body that where you need to mitigate the health effects. But just phenomenologically, it felt a lot like Earth. As far as technology, working in really low gravity like lunar gravity does introduce challenges. Granular materials will behave a lot more cohesively than they do in Earth gravity. And that's because normally materials are driven by gravity. Like if you pour sugar into a funnel, gravity is pulling it down through the funnel. Now there's cohesion between the grains of sugar, but gravity is so much more important that you don't notice the cohesion. Well, when you go to low gravity, like lunar gravity, if you try to pour sugar through a funnel, it won't go through. It'll just sit there in the funnel. And that's because these weak cohesive forces between the grains are now the dominant force because gravity is so much less. And so you start to see behaviors that you didn't anticipate. That means you've got to redesign your technology to be able to work with this material in that environment. A lot of these things, these behaviors, are things that we will not anticipate. you won't think about it until actually in the low gravity environment, you see it happening. And then you're like, oh man, what's going on here? Why is my hardware not working? And you look at it for 10 minutes and then you realize, oh man, it's low gravity. And we didn't realize low gravity was going to affect this component in this way. I like to say that humans are smart enough to solve all the problems. We're just not smart enough to anticipate all the problems. And that's why we need experiment. That's why we need field tests. That's why we need reduced gravity flights. And that's why we need to mature the technology in the environment where it will be operating, which is on the moon or on Mars. And that's why using the moon as a proving ground for Mars, in my opinion, makes sense. Because you're stress testing things in an environment where the moon is actually worse than Mars in most ways. The only way the moon is better than Mars is that you're a lot closer. So you can teleoperate and you can visit the hardware and fix things a lot faster. So I think the moon is a good proving ground. So I think that we're going to be discovering problems. We need to be testing in reduced gravity flights as often as we can. We need to be putting as much realism in our testing as we can. That's why we have this technology readiness level that NASA and other government agencies have been using. TRL 6 is when you have tested in a relevant environment. And often that includes reduced gravity flights for parts of your hardware. So we do need to include that. We do need to check off the box that we've done the TRL 6 testing before we go to TRL 7, because you can find and correct a lot of problems before you actually put hardware in space. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. You also do learn things about body mechanics. The reason it's harder to walk in lunar gravity is because you're airborne a lot longer, and that means any little rotational errors in your hop, which induced a rotational movement in your body, you're not able to correct that until you get to the ground on the next hop. And because you're airborne a lot longer, you rotate a lot more. And so there is some issues with body mechanics, learning how to control the rotations between hops. There's also issues with machinery operating on the moon. If you take a corner too fast on a car, the centrifugal force and the rotational torque it puts on your vehicle is not reduced on the moon, but the gravity that holds you down from tipping is reduced. And so hardware will be a lot tippier in the lunar environment. Like if you have a crane and you rotate the boom on that crane, your crane is going to be 6 times more likely to flip over on the moon compared to on the Earth. So there's small stuff like that regarding mechanics, body mechanics and machine mechanics that need to be accounted for. And you do get a feeling for that when you do some of these reduced gravity flights.
Yeah, I'd never considered the centripetal force thing. I also really like that quote what you just said, that the humans are smart enough to solve the problems but not anticipate them. I think that's very true. We'd love to have you. So we're actually doing a zero gravity flight with Charlie Duke, moonwalker on Apollo 16, and in KSC actually, so right in your backyard. So it'd be cool to have you there as well.
That is so cool that you're going to fly with an Apollo astronaut. That's just so privileged. That's amazing. So congratulations on getting that put together. I've actually been using Charlie Duke's mission in a paper I'm writing right now on the plume effects. When you land on the moon and you blow the soil, on that mission, it was a lot smoother flow field. The dust that was blowing during that landing was a lot more homogeneous. It had fewer streaks because there were fewer rocks, boulders in the area. And therefore, it's a better data set for developing some of the theories. So I'm actually still using data from that lunar landing that Charlie Duke flew in to try to solve the physics for the coming return to the moon.
That's so cool. I'm sure he'd love to hear all about it. Yeah, when we're out there in KSC in February, we'll definitely let you know. We'd love to have you there as well.
Yeah, well, if nothing else, I'd love to come out and just say hi to Charlie Duke.
Yeah.
and see you again in person and just chat. You know, even if I didn't get an opportunity to fly. I mean, I've flown enough. I feel like I've done it enough, and it's time for young people to take their turn. Can I share with you? This is kind of funny, but the one thing that I found most stressful about these reduced gravity flights. So it's not the risk of crashing. It's not the risk of the wings of the airplane bending off. You know, you do these 2G pullouts between every parabola. It's pretty fun to look out the window during the pullout. You have to get used to sitting up in 2G. They tell you to lie on the floor, but after a while, I was standing up, and as long as you don't fall over, you know, you'll break your nose because you can't put your hands out fast enough to catch yourself if you fall, because you fall faster. It's not just that you hit harder, but you actually accelerate and fall faster. It's faster than your body's used to. So your reaction to put your hands out is you're not programmed to do it fast enough, you know, so they don't want you to stand up. But if you eventually get used to looking out the window during the 2G pullout, it's pretty freaky. Looking at the wings bending as this big passenger airline is pulling 2Gs as you're diving towards the ocean. But none of that was really that scary. I just trust the aero engineers did a good job designing the structure of the aircraft. The one thing that made me nervous during those flights, I was afraid I was going to have to go to the bathroom. Because on the NASA aircraft, the Weightless Wonder, they had a bathroom, but they really didn't want you to go to the bathroom in flight because they didn't want to have to clean it after the flight. But on this other aircraft that I flew, they didn't even have a bathroom. They took the bathroom out to save waste. And so what they had was a bucket, and they had Ziploc bags, and they had a blanket that they would hold up for you while you sit on the bucket with a Ziploc bag. And you know, you're already kind of nervous. Your stomach's churning, and then you have to take these drugs. They tell you don't eat anything greasy for breakfast. And so your digestive system's a little upset to begin with. I was living in terror. Every time I flew, like, oh my goodness, I hope I don't have to go to the bathroom. And one time I was on a flight where somebody did have to go to the bathroom. And so they can't do parabolas, you know, with somebody sitting on a bucket. And so they do level flight, and every experimenter in the airplane has to stop, and everybody knows what's going on. And then the blanket comes down and the person comes out, and you all give a slow clap, you know, for the guy that held up the flight. And I was thinking, like, I don't want to be that person. So it's a silly thing to worry about, but that's actually the thing that I worry about most when I fly on those flights.
Yeah, yeah. The whenever the actual experience of space comes up, going, you know, number one and number two, there's always some good stories there. Yeah, Charlie was telling us about you know, what they would do on Apollo 16. This is just hilarious.
I've also seen people get sick. Like almost every flight I was on, somebody would get sick. I never did, fortunately. I always took the maximum drugs that they offered. They would offer, you know, a 1, a 2, or a 3 based on body weight. And my body weight would be a 3 because I'm a 6 foot tall guy, and you know, I'm over that limit where you need a 3. And so one flight, they ran out of 3s and they only had 2s. And you know, up until then, they're always like, always take the maximum. If you take 2, you might get sick. Well, on this flight, they ran out of 3s, and they're like, you'll be okay with a 2. Just take a 2. It's like, really? Every flight before now, you were arguing that I've got to take a 3, but all of a sudden it's okay because you ran out. But fortunately, I never got sick. But one guy I knew that flew got sick. He had flown hundreds of times before, and hundreds of parabolas anyways. He decided he was going to go without the drugs. He got so sick on that flight. What they do is they strap you down in a seat in the back of the airplane, and they give you an injection to drug you up. But he told me later, he just wanted that plane to crash and everybody die just to make the sickness go away. He said, I didn't care if everybody died. It was so miserable. I wanted the plane to crash. And for the rest of the day, he laid on his back, and it was not till the next day that he felt good again. So yeah, take the drugs if they offer the drugs. If they don't take them, do some research, find out what kind of drugs to take for motion sickness. Make sure you're covered.
Yeah, get the Dramamine. Oh my God. I see, Andrew, you got your hand up. And Andrew's been on these flights too.
Yeah, Phil, I was going to say there's this new wonderful modern technology they developed called adult diapers. I started flying zero G back in the mid '90s at JSC, running camera, and then last year I started flying zero G. I flew twice last year, matter of fact, and adult diapers saved the day every time.
Oh wow! I'll have to look into that.
Oh man. Yeah, that's the fun part of space that they don't really tell you.
But the honest truth, it was there. It just and ended up not having a problem. Solo mine.
Yeah. Charlie Duke was telling us about how they would just have to. I mean, I don't know if it's worth getting into all of this, but they would get they'd strip down totally naked in the capsule, and then because it was just that tiny capsule and 3 astronauts in it. They would just have to do it right in front of everyone else, and they had to strip down because there was no little hole in the suits that they were wearing either. So, yeah, maybe too much TMI there, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. We're still biological creatures, but hey, there's a business opportunity. Somebody solved this problem.
Exactly. Very, very entrepreneurial. Well, anyways, I mean, this has been an absolute pleasure. This was super fun. Thank you so much for all your time here. I think we were planning on doing an hour and we got 2. So thanks for the extra time here. I do need to say one thing, which is that we are raffling off a Blue Origin seat, and this has been something actually that it's like an early test case to prove that we can fund space missions. So in this case, we were able to pool money together, people from all over the world, over 2,000 people, to send someone up to space. And we've actually already done this once before, and this is our second astronaut. And we're using a smart contract to select the person randomly. And so it'll be one of our members. And you can join MoonDAO by going to app.moondao.com and enter into having a chance to go to space, something that only, less than 700 people have ever had the opportunity to do. Phil was saying, really our goal is in trying to accelerate a lunar base and trying to prove out some of these economic models, having people from all over the world that do want to see a lunar base in their lifetime, that do think that it's possible, and trying to collect that mind share and organize people to solve some of the most pressing issues towards that goal. And if you find that exciting, definitely consider becoming a member of our organization. And it's pretty easy. We've made a little app, even if you've never worked with Web3 tooling or anything like that. We've made a little app so that we can actually generate a wallet for you and input tokens into your wallet seamlessly. So consider joining MoonDAO. But yeah, thank you so much. This was awesome. Thanks to all our speakers here too in the audience, Rocco, Andrew, Eric. We had Peter Haig here too. That was a great addition as well. But yeah, thank you everyone.
Hey, it was my pleasure to be here today, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future.